Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. I'm so glad you found your way here, because tonight we'll be drifting through one of the most impressive empires the world has ever known, the mighty, mysterious, and unforgettable Roman Empire. Wherever you are, let this be your moment to unwind. Let the pace of the world slow, let the noise grow distant, and let your mind soften like torchlight flickering on ancient stone. Rome may be long gone, but its echoes remain all around us. In languages, in roads, in law and architecture, in stories carved into marble and whispered through time. Tonight you'll hear of vanished legions, gods of the household, golden coins that crossed continents, feasts that lasted for days, and emperors whose lives were stranger than fiction. Some facts may surprise you. Others may feel like memories from a dream. But for now, get cozy. Take a deep breath. And let's begin this soft and winding journey through the forgotten corners of the Roman Empire. Roman forts had heated floors. On the windswept frontiers of the Roman Empire, where winters could be cold and damp, Roman engineers brought warmth from below. Many military forts, especially in the northern provinces like Britannia and Germania, were equipped with hypocaust systems, underfloor heating powered by fire. Furnaces fed hot air into raised floors supported by stone pillars, while flues in the walls carried the heat upward. This system warmed both barracks and bathhouses, providing comfort in harsh climates. The heated rooms were a quiet luxury in the disciplined world of the Roman army. Even outposts far from the heart of the empire maintained a sense of order and refinement. These warm floors were not just technological marvels, they were a symbol of Roman consistency. Whether in Africa or Britain, the empire brought its own version of civilization, tiled, calculated, and never far from fire. The Roman navy was vast and often overlooked. When we think of Rome, we picture soldiers marching, not ships sailing. But the Roman navy played a crucial role in the rise and protection of the empire. Fleets patrolled the Mediterranean, which the Romans called Mare Nostrum, or our sea, guarding trade routes, transporting troops, and suppressing piracy. Massive harbors like Portus near Rome were engineering marvels, with lighthouses, breakwaters, and shipyards. Naval forces helped conquer distant shores, defend coasts, and maintain supply lines to scattered provinces. Yet unlike the legions, sailors were often overlooked and held lower status. Their stories rarely filled marble inscriptions or public triumphs. But without them, Rome would have been vulnerable to invasion and starvation. Their quiet presence kept the empire connected, island to island, shore to shore, across the rhythm of tides. In the long silence between battles, the navy watched the sea and kept the world turning. Some gladiators became celebrities. Though many gladiators lived harsh, dangerous lives, a few rose to fame, becoming ancient Rome's version of sports stars. The most skilled and charismatic fighters drew massive crowds, earned prize money, and won the admiration of fans across the empire. Their names were chanted in arenas, etched into graffiti, and even carved on oil lamps and household goods. Women wrote love notes to their favorites' nobles, bet fortunes on match outcomes. Some gladiators endorsed products or trained the next generation of fighters. If a gladiator won enough matches and survived, he could earn his freedom and retire with honor. One such fighter, Flamma, was offered release 4 times and chose to keep fighting. These men were both admired and objectified, praised for courage, yet barred from full citizenship. In their strength and suffering, they embodied the contradictions of Roman entertainment, admired, exploited, unforgettable. The empire once tried to conquer Scotland and failed. To the Romans, the land north of Hadrian's Wall was mysterious and unruly. They called it Caledonia, and though they tried several times to conquer it, the Roman Empire never fully subdued what we now call Scotland. The tribes there were fierce and fiercely independent, fighting back with guerrilla tactics and deep knowledge of the land. Emperor Agricola led a major campaign into Caledonia around 80 CE and even won a battle at Mons Graupius, but Rome's hold was brief. Later, Emperor Antoninus built another wall, further north than Hadrian's, but it too was abandoned. The terrain was rugged, the weather harsh, and the resistance constant. Eventually, Rome pulled back, fortifying the border and leaving Caledonia unconquered. The empire had stretched from the Atlantic to the deserts of Arabia, but the highlands of Scotland remained out of reach, a wild edge the legions could never tame. The Romans had a god for everything, even sewers. Roman religion was rich with gods, not just for love and war, but for almost every part of life. There were deities for door hinges, crops, childbirth, boundaries, and even sewage. Closina, the goddess of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, was honored with a small shrine near the Forum. Her name meant the purifier, and she symbolized the health and cleanliness of the city. Romans believed that honoring such gods maintained harmony between people and nature, order and chaos. The lairs guarded households, terminus protected property lines, and cardia watched over door hinges. This intricate network of divine presences turned daily life into a quiet dialogue with the sacred. Even the most mundane acts, opening a gate, lighting a lamp, using the latrine, could be touched by ritual. The Roman world was never far from the divine, even beneath the streets. The Coliseum's floor hid a maze of machinery. The arena floor of the Coliseum was once a grand wooden stage, but beneath it lay a hidden world. A vast network of tunnels, elevators, pulleys, and trapdoors allowed for dazzling surprises during the games. Known as the Hypogeum, this underground area housed gladiators, wild animals, scenery, and stage crews. With a system of winches and platforms, animals could be lifted into the arena seemingly from nowhere. Scenery appeared and vanished. Fighters emerged from the depths like myths brought to life. The effect was part of the spectacle, not just strength and blood, but drama and awe. Roars echoed from below. Shadows flickered in the torchlight. Today, the floor is gone, revealing the bones of this secret stage. The Colosseum wasn't only a place of combat, it was a living theatre, where stone and silence conspired to astonish. Rome once had a female gladiator ban. While most gladiators were men, women also fought in the arena, though their presence was rare and often sensationalized. These gladiatresses appeared in special games or as exotic novelties, sometimes dressed to shock or amuse the audience. Some trained alongside male fighters and learned the same weapons and techniques. Their battles were both real and symbolic, challenging traditional roles and drawing curious crowds. But not everyone approved. In 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus issued a ban on female gladiators, citing concerns about morality and decorum. The decision reflected broader anxieties about gender, spectacle, and control. After the ban, records of female fighters vanish almost entirely. Yet their brief presence lingers in carvings, graffiti, and ancient whispers. For a short time, they stepped into the sand, stood under the same sun, and fought with the same courage, leaving behind a trace of defiance in a brutal world. Roman religion was a blend of borrowed beliefs. The Roman Pantheon wasn't born whole. It was assembled over centuries, absorbing gods, rituals, and myths from other cultures. Early Roman religion was rooted in animism and ancestral spirits, But as the Republic expanded, it adopted Greek deities and renamed them. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Ares became Mars. From Etruscans came augury, and sacred symbols. From Egypt came Isis, from Persia, Mithras. Even conquered provinces found their local gods honored alongside Roman ones. Temples were built, festivals merged, and prayers shifted with changing times. This flexibility allowed Roman religion to evolve, not by rejecting foreign gods, but by welcoming them into the fold. It was a spiritual mosaic, blending old and new, local and imperial. In every city, a slightly different rhythm of worship played out, unified not by dogma, but by the shared understanding that the divine was everywhere and always watching. Some Roman cities had apartment buildings. In crowded Roman cities, space was limited, and so the Romans built upward. Insulae, or apartment buildings, housed the urban population in multi-story complexes made of stone, brick, or wood. The wealthiest lived on the ground floor, with spacious rooms and easy access. Above them, floors became smaller, darker, and less stable. Water had to be carried up. Fires were a constant danger. Still, for many Romans, an insula was home. Noisy, cramped, and filled with life. Streets bustled outside, neighbors argued through walls, and families shared simple meals in small rooms. Some insulae rose 5 stories or more, their shadows stretching over markets and alleys. These weren't slums, but early forms of urban living. In their stacked geometry, we see the beginnings of city life as we know it, layered, imperfect, alive. The Romans used urine as a cleaning agent. Strange as it may sound, the Romans used urine, human urine, for cleaning. It was collected in public jars and used as a source of ammonia, a powerful agent for bleaching clothes and treating leather. Fullers, the ancient equivalent of launderers, stomped garments in vats of water and urine to remove dirt and grease. The process was smelly, but effective. So valuable was urine, in fact, that Emperor Vespasian placed a tax on its collection, giving rise to the saying, "Pecunia non olet," money does not stink. The phrase became a kind of proverb for Roman pragmatism. What mattered was not the source of wealth, but its usefulness. In the daily grime of Roman cities, even something as humble or unpleasant as urine found a purpose. It was, in its way, another reflection of Rome itself, resourceful, unflinching, and always finding a way. Roman justice could be harsh, but also humane. Roman law was a complex blend of discipline, fairness, and hierarchy. Crimes like treason or rebellion could bring brutal punishments, crucifixion, exile, or damnatio memoriae, in which a person's name was erased from records and monuments. Yet Roman justice also included legal protections and appeals. Citizens had the right to a trial, to face their accusers, and to be judged by peers or magistrates. Certain punishments were reserved for specific classes. A Roman citizen might be fined, while a slave faced corporal punishment. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code, laid out these principles clearly, a public standard for rights and responsibilities. Over time, legal thinkers like Cicero and Ulpian expanded on ideas of equity and due process. Justice in Rome wasn't always fair by modern standards, but it was structured, evolving, and deeply influential. And in the courtroom's quiet rituals, the empire's sense of order lived on. Some Roman bridges still standing. Built to endure, Roman bridges remained some of the most remarkable feats of ancient engineering. Constructed with stone, mortar, and remarkable precision, they spanned rivers, valleys, and mountain passes, connecting provinces and people across the vast empire. Many used arch designs, which distributed weight efficiently and allowed bridges to withstand centuries of traffic and weather. The Alcantara Bridge in Spain, built around 104 CE, still carries traffic today. In France, Italy, and Turkey, other Roman bridges remain in use or preserved as historical landmarks. Their durability comes from a combination of skilled craftsmanship, strong materials, and careful placement. These weren't temporary solutions, they were investments in permanence. With every stone, the Romans declared, "This road will last, this path will hold." And for some of those bridges, it still does, crossing time as effortlessly as it crossed water. The Romans had public libraries. In a world before printing presses, books were precious handwritten scrolls copied by skilled scribes. And yet, ancient Rome made these treasures available to the public. By the 1st century BCE, public libraries began appearing in Rome, often attached to temples, baths, or civic buildings. Julius Caesar proposed one, but it was Augustus who brought the idea to life, establishing the Bibliotheca Octaviana and others. These libraries were divided into Greek and Latin sections, with reading rooms, catalogues, and spaces for quiet study. Scrolls were stored in armaria, wooden cupboards or niches in the walls. Access was free, though many visitors came simply to socialize or debate philosophy. Emperors and wealthy patrons donated books to grow the collections. While most Romans were illiterate, these libraries offered a quiet sanctuary for scholars, poets, and thinkers. They were temples of thought, open doors to memory, wisdom, and calm. The Roman Empire had a secret police force. Beneath the marble and order of Imperial Rome, there moved a quieter force: watchers, informers, and enforcers. Known as the Frumentarii, they began as military supply officers, but by the 2nd century CE, they had taken on a darker role, gathering intelligence, spying on officials, and reporting directly to the Emperor Past. Based in the Castra Peregrina on the Caelian Hill, they operated in shadow, monitoring dissent and rooting out plots. Their presence instilled fear among senators, governors, and citizens alike. Later, under Diocletian, they were replaced by the agentes in Rebus, a more structured and bureaucratic system of imperial agents. But the purpose remained the same: surveillance, secrecy, control. In a realm where power was often threatened from within, even the emperor needed eyes in every corner. And though their names rarely appear in public records, these secret forces were always there, listening. The Roman Senate once declared a horse a consul. It sounds like a joke, but it may be the most infamous act of imperial satire in Roman history. Emperor Caligula, known for his extravagance and instability, adored his racehorse, Incitatus. According to sources like Suetonius, Caligula treated the animal better than most citizens, housing him in a marble stable, feeding him gilded oats, and even giving him a personal servant. But most famously, Caligula allegedly planned to appoint the horse as a consul, one of the highest political offices in Rome. Some say it was a cruel insult to the Senate, others a reflection of the emperor's madness, and still others argue it was pure political theatre, a way of mocking the incompetence of Rome's ruling class. Either way, it's a reminder that beneath the grandeur of empire, power could still be absurd, theatrical, and strangely personal. The Romans imported flamingos and peacocks for banquets. To impress their guests and display their wealth, wealthy Romans often went to extravagant lengths, including importing exotic animals from distant lands. Flamingos from Africa and peacocks from India were prized not only for their beauty, but for their rarity. At banquets, roasted peacock might be served whole, its feathers carefully reattached after cooking for a dramatic presentation. Flamingo tongues were considered a delicacy, prized for their tender texture and curious flavor. These feasts weren't just meals. They were performances, designed to delight, surprise, and overwhelm. Animals arrived by ship, carried overland, and housed in private menageries until their grand debut. In a world where food reflected power, to serve something rare was to remind your guests how far your influence stretched. And so, the empire's wings extended over every table, from desert dunes to garden courtyards, and into the flickering candlelight of Roman feasts. Emperors were deified after death, sometimes against their will. In Rome, the line between man and God was often blurred. After an emperor died, the Senate could vote to declare him divus, divine. This wasn't just symbolic, it placed the deceased ruler among the gods, complete with temples, cults, and rituals. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, was deified with reverence. Claudius too, though some mocked the decision. But others, like the erratic Commodus, demanded divine status while still alive. More strangely, emperors who had been widely hated or even assassinated were sometimes deified as a political gesture to appease their supporters or legitimize the next ruler. Even emperors who had no interest in godhood could find themselves worshipped by decree. It was power that lingered beyond death, not because they had earned it, but because Rome had decided it must be so. In a world of statues and shrines, even memory could be made divine. The Romans used concrete so strong it still holds today. While modern concrete crumbles in decades, ancient Roman concrete has withstood over 2,000 years of sea, salt, and time. Structures like the Pantheon and harbour walls at Portus remain standing, thanks in part to a blend of volcanic ash, lime, seawater, and crushed stone, a recipe both durable and strangely alive. When seawater seeped into Roman marine concrete, it reacted with the volcanic materials to grow new mineral crystals, which strengthened the mixture over time. This self-healing ability made Roman concrete especially resilient in coastal environments. Scientists today still study its properties in hopes of recreating it for modern infrastructure. The secret was lost for centuries after the fall of the empire, but the results endure. Quiet monuments to a civilization that mixed science with art and built not just for glory, but for permanence. Public baths were social hubs and very sophisticated. To bathe in ancient Rome was to step into a world of architecture, conversation, and ritual. Roman baths, or thermae, weren't just about hygiene. They were public spaces where citizens relaxed, exercised, read, discussed politics, or simply enjoyed the warm mist. A typical bath complex had several chambers, a frigidarium for cold plunges, a tepidarium for warm air, and a coldarium for hot steam. Some had libraries, gardens, shops, or lecture halls. Beneath the floors, ingenious furnaces called hypocausts circulated hot air through hollow spaces, warming the rooms above. Water was piped in by aqueducts and managed with remarkable precision. Entry was usually affordable or even free. For Romans, bathing was part of daily life, a ritual of body and mind, open to rich and poor alike. In many ways, it was the beating heart of the city, clean, warm, and alive with voices. Roman roads were so well built, some are still used. The old Roman saying all roads lead to Rome wasn't just poetic, it was strategic. At its height, the Roman Empire maintained over 50,000 miles of road, paved with stones, layered with gravel, and designed to last. These roads connected distant provinces, enabled swift military movements, and helped traders, messengers, and governors move efficiently across continents. Roman engineers prioritized straight lines whenever possible, building bridges and cutting through hills rather than taking the long way around. Milestones marked distances, and way stations offered rest and supplies. Many of these roads were so solidly built that parts of them still exist today, not as ruins, but as working roads in Europe and the Middle East. Beneath the wheels of modern cars and bicycles lie stones laid by Roman hands, bearing the weight of empires past and present, one step at a time. Latin wasn't just a language, it was a status symbol. In the Roman Empire, language was more than communication, it was identity. Latin wasn't just spoken, it was worn like a badge of belonging. The educated elite used polished, literary Latin in courts, letters, and speeches, while soldiers and common citizens spoke a rougher, more practical version known as vulgar Latin. Mastery of refined Latin signaled education, power, and Roman citizenship. In the provinces, speaking Latin fluently marked someone as Romanized, accepted, elevated, trusted. But this wasn't the only language in the empire. Greek remained dominant in the eastern provinces, and local dialects endured across Africa, Gaul, and Britain. Still, Latin held a special weight. It was the language of the law, the Senate, the Caesars, and eventually, the Church. Even after the empire's fall, Latin lived on in monasteries, in scholarship, and in the roots of modern languages. It spoke of Rome, even in silence. Gladiators rarely fought to the death. Despite what movies often show, most Roman gladiator fights didn't end in death. These warriors were expensive investments, trained in specialized schools, fed and housed, and often owned by wealthy sponsors. Killing one in every match would have been wasteful. Instead, gladiators performed stylized combat, thrilling the crowds with skill, endurance, and dramatic flourishes. Many matches ended when one fighter yielded. The decision to spare or execute was sometimes left to the editor of the games, often a magistrate or even the emperor, and famously, the crowd could signal their wishes with a turn of the thumb. Still, death was always a possibility. Some gladiators became celebrities, winning fame and prizes. Others died young. But for many, the arena was not a death sentence. It was a brutal profession, governed by rules, risk, and ritual. The bloodshed was real, but rarely final. Julius Caesar was kidnapped by pirates and took revenge. Before he was emperor, before he crossed the Rubicon, Julius Caesar was a young nobleman with ambition and attitude. Around the age of 25, while sailing near the coast of Asia Minor, he was captured by Cilician pirates. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, but Caesar, insulted by the low price, insisted they ask for 50. While waiting for his companions to gather the money, he lived among the pirates for over a month. He joked with them, wrote poetry, and warned them, half seriously, that he would have them all crucified once he was free. When the ransom was paid and Caesar released, he wasted no time. He raised a small fleet, hunted the pirates down, reclaimed the silver, and had them executed, just as he had promised. It was a glimpse of the man he would become, charming, cunning, and utterly ruthless. Roman soldiers marched with over 60 pounds of gear. The Roman legionary was a walking fortress. On long campaigns, soldiers carried everything they needed: weapons, armor, rations, tools, cooking pots, even stakes to build their nightly camp. Altogether, their burden often exceeded 60 pounds. This earned them the nickname Marius Mules, after the general who reformed the army and trained them to carry their own supplies. Despite the weight, Roman soldiers could march 20 miles a day, then build a fortified camp before nightfall, complete with ditches, palisades, and organized rows of tents. Their discipline was legendary. their endurance unmatched. The pack itself was carefully arranged on a wooden pole slung over the shoulder, balancing the load to preserve energy. These men weren't just fighters, they were builders, engineers, and survivors. Their strength didn't come only from swords or shields, but from the quiet rhythm of boots on stone, one hard mile at a time. The Roman calendar gave us July and August. Our modern calendar still bears the fingerprints of Roman power. Originally, Rome followed a lunar calendar with 10 months, but reforms gradually added January and February, and by the time of Julius Caesar, the calendar had become a political tool. In 46 BCE, Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, aligning the year with the sun and standardizing the length of months. To honor him, the Senate renamed the month Quintilis as Julius, which we now call July. Later, Augustus Caesar received the same honor. Sextilis became August. Not only that, but Augustus insisted his month be just as long as Julius's, so a day was borrowed from February to make August 31 days. It was a subtle assertion of power, time itself reshaped in the image of emperors. And so, each summer, as the months of July and August pass by, we're still living in the shadow of Rome. Some Roman villas had central heating. Long before modern radiators, some Roman homes were warmed with a clever system called the hypocaust. Wealthy villas, especially in cooler regions like Britannia, used this technology to heat floors and walls from beneath. A raised floor was supported by stone or brick pillars with hollow flues built into the walls. Beneath this space, slaves tended a furnace, feeding it wood or coal. Hot air from the fire circulated freely under the floors and up through the walls, creating gentle, radiant heat throughout the room. This system was commonly used in bathhouses, but elite households installed it for comfort and status. Walking barefoot on warm stone in winter was a quiet luxury few could afford. The design was efficient, effective, and surprisingly advanced, a worn testament to Roman engineering and to the empire's pursuit of not just survival, but ease. Vomitoriums weren't for vomiting. Despite the popular myth, vomitoriums had nothing to do with overeating or purging during feasts. The word vomitorium comes from the Latin voma, meaning to spew forth, but it referred to architecture, not digestion. These were passageways in large public venues, like theaters and amphitheaters, designed to let crowds exit swiftly. Rows of arching corridors funneled people in and out efficiently, giving the impression of spectators being spat out from the building. The misunderstanding likely began in the 19th century, when Victorian writers imagined Roman decadence in exaggerated detail. In reality, Romans did indulge in lavish banquets, but the idea of designated vomiting rooms is pure fiction. A vomitorium was simply smart design, a practical Roman innovation, not a symbol of excess. It reminds us that sometimes even the most vivid myths about the past are built on simple mistranslations. The Coliseum could be flooded for naval battles. Among the many wonders of the Roman Coliseum, one of the most spectacular and debated is its use for naumatia, or mock naval battles. According to some ancient sources, the arena could be flooded with water to stage dramatic sea battles, complete with ships, sailors, and staged warfare. The mechanics of how this was done remain a mystery. Some historians believe early versions of the Coliseum included drainage and water channels that allowed temporary flooding. Others suggest these events took place in specially built basins elsewhere in the city. Regardless of where or how, the idea speaks to Rome's obsession with spectacle, entertainment on a massive scale, where war was reimagined as theatre. These staged battles were not just distractions, they were demonstrations of imperial control, turning chaos into choreography and water into a stage for power, performance, and awe. Roman graffiti was shockingly familiar. Walk through the ruins of Pompeii and you'll find the walls still speak, in scratches, scribbles, and snatches of ancient lives. Roman graffiti wasn't elegant or poetic. It was casual, messy, and remarkably human. Some inscriptions declare love or heartbreak. Others are crude jokes, political slogans, advertisements, or insults. In one doorway, someone scrawled, "I was here." Another reads, "Successus was here and had a great time." One innkeeper advertised his tavern's wine, while a wall near the Gladiators' barracks boasts of victories and rivals. Even bathroom walls weren't spared. The language varies, but the voices feel oddly close. Ordinary people leaving traces of their boredom, humor, pride, or frustration. In a world of marble and myth, these scraps of graffiti are a quiet reminder. The Romans weren't just statues and senators. They were people. And like us, they had something to say, even if only in passing. The empire once spanned 3 continents. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across Europe, into northern Africa, and deep into Western Asia. 3 vast continents connected by roads, trade, and imperial will. From the rain-soaked highlands of Britain to the sunlit deserts of Egypt, the empire encompassed over 50 million people and thousands of miles. This enormous reach allowed for a staggering mix of cultures, languages, and beliefs, all woven into the fabric of Roman rule. Soldiers from Gaul might serve in Syria. Merchants from Carthage might trade in Athens. Egyptian gods stood beside Roman ones in temples built for both. It was not a peaceful harmony, but a complex network held together by infrastructure, military power, and cultural adaptation. The empire wasn't just big, it was interconnected. And though its borders eventually crumbled, its roads, ruins, and ideas still stretch across the world today, quiet as old footprints in stone. Roman women wore lead-based makeup. In ancient Rome, beauty came at a cost, and sometimes a deadly one. Pale skin was considered fashionable, a sign of wealth and refinement, since it suggested a life spent indoors, far from labor. To achieve this look, many Roman women applied white makeup made from lead-based compounds. These powders created a smooth, pale finish, but over time the lead seeped into the skin and bloodstream, leading to chromic poisoning. Some women also used red ochre for rouge, soot for eyeliner, and plant dyes to tint their lips. Cosmetics were stored in carved ivory boxes and applied with care. Beauty rituals were both personal and public, shaped by fashion, class, and mythology. Even though the dangers weren't fully understood, the pursuit of elegance often outweighed caution. In this way, vanity and vulnerability walked hand in hand beneath the painted surface of a Roman face. The emperor had his own food taster. To be emperor of Rome was to live in splendor and in constant fear. Assassination was a real and frequent threat, and poison was one of the most insidious weapons. To guard against this, emperors employed pregustators, official food tasters who sampled each meal before it touched the ruler's lips. These trusted servants often tasted wine, water, fruit, and even medicine. If the food taster survived, only then would the emperor dine. This practice was not limited to Rome, but it became especially common during times of political unrest. Some emperors also turned to physicians and alchemists to create antidotes in advance. Others were more paranoid, refusing food entirely if something seemed off. Even in moments of luxury, golden goblets, silver platters, exotic spices, danger lingered just out of sight. In the palace of an emperor, even dinner could be a matter of life and death. Roman firefighters were also part-time gangsters. In ancient Rome, firefighting wasn't just a public service. It was sometimes a racket. The most famous firefighting force was organized by Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Roman history. His brigade would arrive at the scene of a burning building, but before lifting a finger, they would offer to buy the property from the panicked owner at a fraction of its value. If the owner agreed, Crassus's men would put out the fire. If not, they would let it burn. Even after the state created more formal firefighting corps, many remained privately run and prone to corruption. Over time, emperors like Augustus reformed the system, creating the Vigiles, a professional firefighting and night watch force. Still, the origins of Roman firefighting remind us that even in emergencies, power could be wielded as profit, and that protection in ancient Rome often came with a price. Some emperors dressed as gods in public. The line between emperor and deity was always thin in Rome, but some rulers stepped across it with theatrical flair. Caligula, for example, is said to have appeared in public dressed as Jupiter, complete with golden beard, thunderbolt, and ornate robes. Nero reportedly performed on stage in divine costumes, portraying gods and heroes alike. Domitian preferred to be addressed as Master and God, while Commodus styled himself as Hercules, even commissioning statues of himself in lion skins and wielding a club. To some, these performances were blasphemous or egotistical. To others, they reinforced the emperor's mystique and power. After all, if Rome's rulers were chosen by fate, why not wear the image of the gods themselves? Whether out of madness, strategy, or sheer indulgence, these emperors blurred the boundary between myth and man, dressing not just to impress, but to ascend. Wealthy Romans had indoor plumbing. Centuries before modern plumbing, the wealthiest citizens of Rome enjoyed a surprisingly sophisticated system of running water. Thanks to aqueducts, vast channels that carried fresh water into the city, private homes could be equipped with lead or clay pipes that delivered water straight to kitchens, fountains, and even indoor toilets. Some elite villas had complex bathrooms with basins, bathtubs, and drainage systems hidden beneath marble floors. Heated water could be circulated through the hypocaust, turning a simple wash into a warm bath. Waste flowed through underground sewers like the Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest drainage systems in the world. Of course, this luxury wasn't universal. Most Romans still relied on public baths and communal latrines. But for those who could afford it, indoor plumbing offered comfort, privacy, and a quiet kind of status, proof that Rome's engineering genius flowed right into daily life. A Roman legion once disappeared without a trace. One of the great mysteries of Roman history surrounds the 9th Legion, Legio the 9th Hispana. This unit was once among Rome's most celebrated, fighting in Spain, Germania, and Britain. But sometime after the early 2nd century CE, the 9th vanishes from the records. No mention of its transfer, destruction, or disbanding has ever been found. Some believe the legion was annihilated during a rebellion in Britain, perhaps crushed in the misty north, far beyond Hadrian's Wall. Others think it was redeployed to the eastern provinces and quietly absorbed into another force. The story inspired novels, films, and endless speculation. What's known is that an entire Roman legion, over 5,000 men, simply ceased to appear in history. Whether lost in battle or erased by bureaucracy, the 9th remains a haunting silence in the empire's otherwise detailed memory, a ghost marching just beyond the edge of fact. Rome had its own postal system. Long before stamps or mailboxes, the Roman Empire maintained a vast and efficient courier network known as the cursus publicus. Created by Augustus, it allowed imperial officials to send messages and documents across thousands of miles with remarkable speed. Couriers rode in relays, changing horses at stations called mutations, and resting at inns known as mansions. These stations were placed along major Roman roads, spaced to ensure continuous travel. Messages traveled from Britannia to Rome or from Egypt to Gaul in surprisingly short timeframes, sometimes just days. The system wasn't open to the public, but it allowed emperors, governors, and military commanders to coordinate across the empire. Sealed scrolls, wax tablets, and even coded messages passed along the cursus routes, carried by riders who knew the roads as well as the terrain. It was communication as conquest, a way to bind distant provinces to the heart of Rome. Roman law influences courts, even today. Though centuries have passed since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the ideas embedded in Roman law still shape modern legal systems. Concepts like contracts, property rights, civil procedure, and legal precedent can all trace roots to Roman jurisprudence. The 12 tables compiled in the 5th century BCE were Rome's first written laws, a foundation for justice based on transparency and citizenship. Later, emperors and scholars developed increasingly sophisticated legal codes, culminating in the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian Code, in the 6th century CE. This compilation became the cornerstone of European civil law and influenced systems around the world, from continental Europe to Latin America. Even phrases like supina, habeas corpus, and pro bono come from Latin legal tradition. Roman law wasn't just about control. It was an attempt to make order out of complexity. And in many ways, its logic endures. Emperor Nero allegedly fiddled while Rome burned. In the year 64 CE, a great fire swept through Rome, raging for 6 days and destroying much of the city. According to popular legend, Emperor Nero watched from a distance, playing the fiddle as flames devoured the capital. But the truth is murkier. The violin didn't even exist in Nero's time. If anything, he may have played a lyre, a harp-like instrument, and perhaps not during the fire at all. Ancient sources give conflicting accounts. Some accuse Nero of arson to clear space for a grand new palace, while others claim he rushed back to the city and opened public buildings for the homeless. Over time, the story of Nero fiddling while Rome burned became a metaphor for negligence, for leaders detached from suffering. Whether true or exaggerated, the image endures. A ruler plucking notes above the chaos as the world turned to ash beneath him. The Romans built a 53,000-mile road network. The Roman Empire was bound together not just by power, but by stone. At its height, Rome maintained a road network stretching over 53,000 miles, an astonishing achievement of planning, labor, and ambition. These roads were built with multiple layers: sand, gravel, and stone, often crowned in the middle for drainage. Milestones marked distances and gave travelers a sense of orientation. Roads connected cities, ports, forts, and borders, allowing armies to march quickly, merchants to trade efficiently, and messages to travel swiftly across provinces. The most famous was the Via Appia, the Appian Way, begun in 312 BCE and still visible today. Roman roads didn't meander, they cut through hills and spanned valleys with confidence. Some are still in use, layered beneath modern highways. To walk them today is to step into grooves worn by sandals, hooves, and wheels, a quiet echo of empire underfoot. Some Roman festivals were wild and unrestrained. While Roman society valued discipline and order, its calendar made room for revelry and sometimes total reversal. Festivals like Saturnalia turned the world upside down. Slaves dined as masters, gifts were exchanged, and laughter replaced hierarchy. During Bacchanalia, worshippers of Bacchus, the god of wine, held secret gatherings filled with music, dance, and ecstatic rites. These celebrations blurred lines between ritual and indulgence, offering moments of joy, release, and even chaos. In Lupercalia, priests ran through the streets striking people with strips of goat hide, a fertility rite both shocking and strangely playful. Some festivals were public and political, others private and mystical. But all were embedded in the Roman rhythm of life, where the sacred and the sensual coexisted. These days weren't merely holidays, they were essential expressions of emotion, community, and the freedom to be wild, at least for a while. Roman dentistry used gold wire. Even in the ancient world, a bright smile was valued. Roman dental practices were surprisingly advanced, especially for the wealthy. Archaeological remains have shown that some Romans used gold wire to bind loose teeth, acting as an early form of dental bridgework. They also cleaned their teeth with powdered pumice, charcoal, and pastes made from crushed bones or oyster shells. Mouthwashes were common, and though their ingredients varied, some included vinegar, salt, or even urine, believed to whiten the teeth. Toothaches were treated with herbal remedies or, in severe cases, extraction. Dentists, or medici dentarii, could be found in cities and army camps alike. Their tools included forceps, scrapers, and drills. While much of their knowledge came from Greek medicine, Roman dentistry was its own craft, blending practicality with cosmetic care. And in gold-threaded smiles, we glimpse a people who valued beauty, even in pain. A single Roman coin could cross the entire empire. Roman coins were more than money. They were messages, tools, and travelers. A silver denarius minted in Rome could pass through dozens of hands and hundreds of miles, from merchant stalls in Gaul to garrisons on the Danube. These coins were standardized in weight and purity, making them trusted across the empire. On one side, they often bore the face of the emperor, a symbol of stability and control. On the other, they carried images of gods, victories, or slogans designed to promote Roman values. The coins told stories, spread propaganda, and reflected shifting tides of power. Because the empire was so vast and interconnected, a single coin could travel from desert markets to mountain outposts, always recognized, always useful. Today, these worn bits of silver and bronze turn up in fields and riverbeds, bearing silent witness to the vastness of Rome and the countless lives it touched. The Romans had takeout food shops. In the bustling streets of ancient cities, not everyone had a kitchen. Many Romans, especially those living in small apartments, relied on thermopolia, the ancient equivalent of takeout counters. These small shops served hot food and drinks from large ceramic jars called dolia, embedded in stone counters. Customers could order stews, breads, sausages, lentils, and wine, all ready to eat on the go. Thermopolia were colorful, decorated with frescoes and open to the street, creating lively scenes of everyday life. Some catered to locals, others to travelers or soldiers. For the working class, they were a daily necessity. Even wealthier citizens occasionally stopped by for convenience. The remains of these ancient snack bars have been found in cities like Pompeii, preserved so well that charred food, graffiti, and menus have survived. In their simplicity, they remind us that the rhythms of hunger, habit, and hurried meals haven't changed so much after all. Roman mosaics could be astonishingly detailed. Across the Roman Empire, from North Africa to Britain, floors and walls bloomed with tiny tiles, each one placed by hand. These mosaics, made from stone, glass, or ceramic, were more than decoration. They told stories, scenes from mythology, battles, animals, portraits, and geometric patterns all appeared in vivid color and remarkable detail. Some mosaics used thousands of tesserae, the small, square tiles, no bigger than a fingernail. The finest works captured subtle expressions, flowing hair, and the shimmer of water, all in stone. Wealthy Romans commissioned them to showcase status and taste, often embedding them in the floors of villas, baths, or public spaces. Some included inscriptions, jokes, or household greetings like, "Welcome, friend." Even after centuries buried under ash or soil, many mosaics remain intact, their colors still rich, their stories still visible. They are fragments of daily life, carefully preserved in patience and pattern. The Vestal Virgins were sacred and strictly watched. In the heart of Rome stood the Temple of Vesta, where a sacred flame burned without interruption, tended by the Vestal Virgins. Chosen as young girls, these priestesses took a vow of chastity and served for 30 years. Their role was central to the spiritual well-being of Rome. If the flame went out, it was seen as an omen. Vestals lived in luxury, enjoyed high status, and were protected by law. But their lives were closely controlled. Breaking the vow of chastity carried a terrible punishment: death by live burial, sealed in a chamber with a small amount of food and water. Such severity reflected the symbolic weight the Vestals carried: purity, loyalty, the stability of Rome itself. And yet, many served with honor and grace, walking in silence past senators and soldiers, keepers of the flame in a world of fire and stone. Romans believed in household spirits. For the Romans, the divine wasn't only found in temples, it lived in the home. Each family honored lares and penates, household spirits who protected the hearth, food stores, and ancestors. Small shrines called lararia held figurines or painted images of these spirits, often placed in kitchens or near doorways. Daily offerings, bits of bread, wine, or incense, were made to keep them happy and attentive. The genius, another guardian spirit, represented the soul or essence of a person, a place, or even the head of the household. These beliefs weren't grand or dramatic. They were quiet rituals woven into daily life. Lighting a lamp, saying a prayer, leaving a small gift. These were gestures of continuity, comfort, and connection. In a vast empire of marble gods and public sacrifice, it was the invisible spirits of home that gave many Romans their deepest sense of protection. The Coliseum could hold over 50,000 people. Rising from the heart of ancient Rome, the Coliseum, or Flavium Amphitheatre, was one of the largest structures ever built in the ancient world. At full capacity, it could seat more than 50,000 spectators, each with assigned entrances and tiered seating based on social class. From emperors and senators to commoners and slaves, the people of Rome gathered beneath its arches to watch gladiator contests, animal hunts, public executions, and mock sea battles. Awning systems called velaria shaded the crowds, while underground chambers held animals, scenery, and fighters waiting their turn. The acoustics allowed voices to carry. The engineering allowed crowds to flow in and out in minutes. More than just entertainment, the games were spectacles of power, order, and identity. The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of Rome itself. Massive, organized, brutal, and astonishingly alive. Roman banquets sometimes lasted for days. To dine with Rome's elite was to enter a world of indulgence, ritual, and performance. Lavish banquets, especially during the Imperial period, could stretch on for hours or even days, blending entertainment, conversation, and course after extravagant course. Reclining on couches in richly decorated triclinia, guests feasted on delicacies like roasted peacock, stuffed dormice, honeyed dates, and seafood from distant coasts. Between courses, dancers performed. Poets recited verses, and musicians filled the air with soft melodies. Wine flowed freely, sometimes diluted, sometimes not, depending on the host's mood. Servants moved in quiet rhythms, tending to every need. For the wealthy, these banquets weren't just meals. They were displays of culture, connection, and control. Even the architecture of the villa was part of the spectacle. While the poor of Rome lived on bread and olives, the privileged few could taste the entire empire, one bite at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was founded by twins. According to Roman legend, the origin of the empire began with a pair of abandoned infants, Romulus and Remus. Left to die by the banks of the river Tiber, the twins were rescued by a she-wolf who nursed them in a cave beneath the Palatine Hill. Eventually, they were found by a shepherd and raised as his own. As young men, they dreamed of building a city together, but a dispute broke out, and Romulus killed his brother. On April the 21st, in the year 753 BCE, Romulus founded the city of Rome, naming it after himself. That one act of mythic violence marked the start of something vast. Whether or not the story is true, it tells us what Rome believed about itself, that it was born of ambition, forged in conflict, and destined for greatness. The Romans made glass windows. Long before skyscrapers gleamed with glass, the Romans were shaping this delicate material into windows for their homes and bathhouses. By the 1st century CE, glass blowing had become a widespread craft, and Rome was producing panes of translucent, though not entirely clear, glass. Wealthier buildings featured windows made from flattened, thick sheets that allowed light to pass while softening visibility. These early windows didn't provide a clear view like modern glass, but they insulated against wind and let in the glow of the sun. In colder regions of the empire, they added comfort to heated rooms and helped trap warmth indoors. Glass also became a medium for art, with colored panes, mosaics, and inlays appearing in temples and villas. Though fragile, these ancient windows marked a quiet leap in daily life, proof that Roman innovation touched not just roads and temples, but the very light in a room. Caesar's last words might not have been "Et tu, Brute." In Shakespeare's telling, Julius Caesar meets betrayal with a line etched into literary history: "Et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus." But ancient sources offer no such clarity. According to Suetonius, Caesar said nothing as he was stabbed, merely pulling his toga over his head in silence. Plutarch records that Caesar may have addressed Brutus in Greek, saying, "Chi su teknon, you too, child," a phrase that could mean betrayal, or perhaps a bitter kind of resignation. Other historians claimed he simply groaned. What is certain is that on the Ides of March 44th BCE, Caesar was attacked by a group of senators, including close allies, and stabbed 23 times. His death changed the course of Roman history. Whether he spoke words of shock, sorrow, or nothing at all, the moment lives on, not for what was said, but for the silence that followed. Roman slavery was complex and widespread. Slavery in ancient Rome was woven into every part of society. Enslaved people worked in homes, farms, kitchens, mines, ships, workshops, and even the emperor's palace. Some were born into bondage, others captured in war or sold into servitude. But Roman slavery wasn't always permanent. With luck, an enslaved person could be freed or manumitted and go on to become a citizen, even rising to wealth and status. Educated slaves sometimes served as teachers, scribes, or doctors. Others faced brutal conditions in mines and galleys, where life was short and escape impossible. The legal system treated slaves as property, but in practice, their roles, rights, and paths varied widely. Rome's economy depended on their labor yet their voices are mostly lost to history. In graffiti, tombstones, and whispered mentions, we catch only glimpses of lives lived in shadow, ordinary, suffering, enduring. The empire once auctioned off the throne. In the year 193 CE, following the assassination of Emperor Pertinax, Rome entered a period of chaos known as the Year of the Five Emperors. What happened next was almost unthinkable. The imperial throne was auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite palace soldiers, offered the emperorship to the man willing to pay them the most. Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator, outbid his rival with promises of vast sums. He became emperor not by conquest or lineage, but by purchase. His reign, however, was short-lived. The public was outraged. Rival generals refused to acknowledge him. Within 9 weeks, Julianus was overthrown and executed. The episode revealed just how fragile the imperial system had become and how easily power could be bought, betrayed, and lost. Even in the heart of the empire, the crown could rest not on merit or might, but on coin. The Romans had their own form of fast food. In the busy streets of Rome and its many cities, not everyone had the space or means to cook at home. So instead, they grabbed a bite at Thermopylae, the ancient world's version of fast food. These small street-side shops served ready-to-eat meals like lentil stew, sausage, olives, bread, or wine. Hot food was kept warm in large sunken jars called dolia, set into stone counters facing the street. Customers could stand, eat quickly, and go, or take their meal to nearby steps or squares. The aroma of stews and spice would mingle with the sounds of the crowd and the clatter of carts. Thermopylae were everywhere, especially in working-class neighborhoods, and excavations in Pompeii have preserved some so well that decorations, graffiti, and even traces of food have survived. In their humbleness, they reveal something wonderfully human, the need for something hot, simple, and ready to go. Emperors were often declared by the army. While the Roman Senate once held power to name emperors, over time that power shifted to the legions. In later centuries, it became increasingly common for an emperor to be declared not by law, but by the roar of soldiers. A general, beloved and victorious, could be hailed as imperator by his troops on the battlefield. With the right support and enough force, he might march on Rome and claim the throne. This wasn't always peaceful. Rival claimants clashed in civil wars, provinces split loyalties, and emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed. The Praetorian Guard, tasked with protecting the emperor, sometimes chose, or even murdered, rulers to suit their own interests. The imperial office, though gilded, was dangerously unstable. And in many cases, a man became emperor not through politics or birthright, but because soldiers believed he should wear the purple and were willing to fight for it. The Pantheon's dome is still the largest of its kind. In the heart of Rome stands the Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, and a wonder of engineering still unmatched. Its great dome, nearly 2,000 years old, remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. At its center is the oculus, a circular opening to the sky that allows sunlight, rain, and moonlight to drift down into the vast interior. The dome's design is both elegant and precise. Layers of concrete grow lighter toward the top, mixed with volcanic ash and pumice to reduce weight. The structure rests on hidden arches and thick walls that distribute pressure evenly. Completed around 126 CE under Emperor Hadrian, the Pantheon has endured war, time, and weather with barely a crack. It feels impossibly light and immovably strong all at once. Even today, architects and engineers marvel at it, a temple that became a time capsule, sheltering both gods and genius. Senators wore purple stripes to show their rank. In ancient Rome, clothing was never just fashion. It was a language of status, rank, and tradition. For senators, the key symbol was the latus clavus, a wide vertical stripe of purple dyed into the front of their tunics. This stripe, often made from Tyrian purple, a costly dye derived from sea snails, marked them as members of Rome's political elite. The wider the stripe, the higher the rank. Equites, or knights, wore a narrower version called the angustus clavus. Even the toga praetexta, a white toga with a purple border, was reserved for magistrates and high officials. These distinctions were strictly enforced and visible to all. In a city of marble and crowds, color told the story of power. And nothing said authority like purple, the hue of emperors, senators, and ceremony, flowing quietly through the folds of every formal gathering. Roman children played with dolls and dice. Though ancient Rome is often remembered for war and empire, childhood still bloomed in its quieter corners. Roman children played with dolls made of clay, wood, or ivory, some with movable limbs, painted features, and tiny accessories. Miniature animals, carts, and soldiers also filled their games. Knucklebones, similar to jacks, were tossed and caught, while dice games were wildly popular, even among adults. Boys and girls played tag, marbles, and even early versions of hoop rolling or ball games. Wealthy children might have toys carved with exquisite detail, while simpler versions filled the markets for everyday families. Some girls, upon marrying, would dedicate their dolls to the household gods, a farewell to childhood. Through these small joys and rituals, Roman children lived with laughter and imagination, just as children do everywhere. Empires rose and fell, but the games of childhood remained, unchanged beneath the sun. The Romans believed lightning was a message from Jupiter. In Roman religion, lightning wasn't random. It was a divine signal. Jupiter, king of the gods, ruled the sky, and his thunderbolts were seen as expressions of will, warning, or favor. Augurs, priests trained in interpreting omens, studied the direction of lightning strikes, the timing, and even the location, believing they could discern the god's intentions. If lightning struck during a Senate meeting or battle, it could halt proceedings, delay campaigns, or trigger new rituals. In times of crisis, sacrifices were made to appease Jupiter and restore balance. His temple on the Capitoline Hill stood as both a symbol of protection and a place of petition. Lightning rods didn't yet exist, but sacred boundaries and prayers offered spiritual defense. For the Romans, a flash in the sky wasn't just nature. It was communication, crackling across the clouds from the highest throne in heaven. Roman temples were often converted into churches. As the Roman Empire transitioned from paganism to Christianity, many temples found new life, not in ruins, but in ritual. Rather than tear down these sacred spaces, early Christians repurposed them, converting temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, or Venus into churches devoted to saints and angels. This practical approach preserved much of Rome's architectural heritage, from Corinthian columns to marble floors. The Pantheon, once a temple to all gods, became a Christian church in the 7th century and has remained in continuous use ever since. In this way, ancient walls carried new prayers. Statues were removed, altars rededicated, and the divine found new names. But the spaces remained familiar, echoing with both continuity and change. Through these quiet transformations, the Roman world bridged the ancient and medieval, blending stone with spirit in a seamless evolution of belief. Citizens wore togas, but only on special occasions. The toga is one of the most iconic garments of ancient Rome, yet few people wore it regularly. Made from a large, heavy piece of wool, often up to 20 feet long, a toga was difficult to drape and impractical for daily use. It was reserved for formal occasions, public ceremonies, legal appearances, religious rites, and political life. Roman citizens, particularly men, wore it to signal status and civic identity. Different styles and colors marked different roles. The toga praetexta, with a purple border, was worn by magistrates and young boys of noble birth, while the plain white toga pura was standard for adult male citizens. Mourning togas were dark, while candidates for office wore specially whitened ones, giving rise to the word candidate. For everyday life, simpler tunics sufficed. But when Rome dressed for ceremony, it wrapped itself in tradition, fold after fold of public meaning. The Romans had divorce laws. In the Roman world, marriage was a legal contract, and like most contracts, it could be broken. Divorce wasn't forbidden or scandalous. In fact, it was relatively common and could be initiated by either spouse. If a couple chose to separate, they often did so by mutual agreement, with no need for court intervention. Property and dowries were negotiated, and children typically remained with the father. Reasons for divorce ranged from adultery to infertility to political convenience. In elite circles, marriages were often arranged for alliances, and divorces followed when alliances shifted. Some women married multiple times, managing their own estates and legal affairs between husbands. While romantic love existed, Roman marriage was deeply rooted in duty, status, and family strategy. Divorce, then, was simply another thread in the complex fabric of Roman social life, not a rupture, but a realignment. Emperors sometimes changed the calendar. The Roman calendar, like so much in the empire, was a blend of practicality, politics, and ambition. Julius Caesar's reform in 46 BCE introduced the Julian calendar, adding leap years and aligning months with the solar year. But even after this correction, the calendar remained vulnerable to imperial influence. Emperors sometimes renamed months in their own honor. July and August, named for Julius and Augustus, replaced quintiles and sextiles. Later, Caligula and Domitian attempted to rename other months, but their changes didn't last. The calendar was more than just timekeeping. It was a canvas for memory, authority, and legacy. Festivals, anniversaries, and religious observances all shaped the rhythm of the year. Through calendar reforms, emperors tried to carve their names into the very fabric of time, a quiet, lasting echo that returned each year with the turning of the seasons. Emperor Hadrian built a wall across Britain. Stretching more than 70 miles across northern Britain, Hadrian's wall marked the edge of Roman control and the beginning of the unknown. Built around 122 CE under the orders of Emperor Hadrian, it wasn't just a military barrier. It was a symbol, a line drawn across wild, untamed land meant to keep invaders out and project strength. The wall stood up to 15 feet high in places, flanked by ditches, watchtowers, and forts spaced evenly along its path. Soldiers stationed there endured harsh weather and long patrols, living far from the comforts of Rome. Locals traded across it, lived beside it, and sometimes challenged it. Today, Hadrian's wall still winds across the hills, its stones softened by moss and time. It whispers of borders and ambition, of how empires define what is ours and what is theirs, and of how those lines never truly hold forever. Roman funerals could be public spectacles. To die in ancient Rome was not always a quiet affair. Funerals, especially for the wealthy or powerful, were grand processions filled with music, chanting, and display. Professional mourners wailed through the streets. Actors dressed as the deceased's ancestors, reenacting family lineage. The body was carried on a bier, sometimes adorned with flowers or a death mask, and followed by relatives and clients. Eulogies were delivered in the forum. The burial itself took place outside the city walls, often in family tombs or along roads lined with monuments. For emperors and generals, the ceremony could be even more elaborate, including public cremation, divine honors, or the release of an eagle symbolizing the soul ascending to the gods. Yet even humble funerals had meaning, guided by ritual and memory. In Rome, death was a continuation of life's performance, a final march through the eyes of the living. Roman engineers used water power for mills. The Romans were not just conquerors, they were master builders, always searching for efficiency. Among their quieter innovations was the use of water-powered mills. By harnessing the flow of rivers and aqueducts, Roman engineers turned water wheels that ground grain into flour, powered saws, and even drove complex machinery. One of the most impressive examples is the Barbegal Mill complex in southern France, where 16 water wheels worked in cascading sequence, a kind of industrial bakery for the ancient world. These mills fed armies, cities, and settlements with remarkable speed. The technology wasn't widespread, but where it appeared, it demonstrated the Roman genius for combining practicality with design. In the rush of falling water and the steady turn of wheels, we glimpse a world always in motion, quietly powered by nature, shaped by stone, and guided by Roman hands. Some Roman emperors were teenagers. In a city built by ambition, age didn't always come before power. Several Roman emperors took the throne in their teens, some by accident, others by design. Elagabalus became emperor at just 14, brought to power by a powerful grandmother and a loyal army. He ruled for 4 turbulent years before being overthrown. Gordian III was 13 when declared emperor during a chaotic civil war. His youth brought stability for a time, though his reign ended in mysterious death. These young rulers were often controlled by advisors, generals, or family, used as symbols of continuity or legitimacy. Yet some tried to rule in their own right, with varying results. Their stories are full of contradiction, innocence and corruption, fragility and power. In marble statues, they appear youthful and serene. But behind the eyes was a world of politics, pressure, and danger far beyond their years. The Roman military had medical corps. Warfare in ancient Rome was brutal, but it wasn't without care. The Roman legions maintained a surprisingly advanced medical system, especially by the standards of the ancient world. Military camps included valetudinaria, field hospitals where injured soldiers were treated. Trained medics, called medici, served within the ranks, offering first aid, performing surgeries, and managing infections. Tools like forceps, scalpels, and bone saws have been found at excavation sites, along with evidence of sutures and even dental work. Clean water from aqueducts, strict hygiene practices, and well-ventilated infirmaries helped limit disease. Wounds were treated with honey, vinegar, and herbal salves. Soldiers were expected to recover and return to service, so medical care was both humane and practical. In the quiet spaces behind the front lines, Roman medicine worked steadily, not with miracles, but with method, keeping the legions moving and the empire alive. Roman time was divided into 10 months, then 12. The original Roman calendar, attributed to Romulus, divided the year into 10 months totaling 304 days, with a long, uncounted winter between. The year began in March Martius and ended in December Decem, meaning 10. Later, King Numa Pompilius added January and February, bringing the total to 12 months and aligning the calendar more closely with the lunar cycle. Still, it remained inconsistent until Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar in 46 BCE, standardizing the months and adding leap years. The names of the months reflect both numbers and gods. March for Mars, April for Aphrodite, May for Maya, June for Juno. July and August were renamed to honor Caesar and Augustus. The months we use today carry the echoes of that old system, a blend of mythology, politics, and practicality. Each page of the calendar still turns with the quiet tick of Roman time. Emperors sometimes adopted heirs to avoid civil war. In a system with no fixed rules for succession, Roman emperors often looked beyond bloodlines. Adoption became a political tool, a way to name a capable heir, secure the loyalty of the army, and prevent chaos. Some of Rome's most successful rulers were adopted: Augustus by Julius Caesar, Trajan by Nerva, Hadrian by Trajan, and so on. This period, sometimes called the era of the 5 good emperors, was marked by peace and stability. The adopted heir was often a respected general or administrator, chosen for merit rather than birth. It was a strategy rooted in pragmatism, not sentiment. In times of crisis, adoption could calm rival factions and unify the empire. While not always successful, it offered Rome a path beyond dynasty, a chance to place wisdom over lineage, and perhaps for a moment to choose the right man for the purple robe. The empire had over 100 provinces. As the Roman Empire expanded, its territory was divided into provinciae, administrative regions governed by appointed officials. At its peak, the empire managed over 100 of these provinces, stretching from the windswept hills of Britain to the palm-lined roads of Egypt. Each province had its own governor, military presence, tax system, and capital city. Some were senatorial provinces, governed by former consuls. Others were imperial, directly under the emperor's control. This system allowed Rome to manage vast and diverse lands, speaking different languages, worshipping different gods, with a sense of cohesion and oversight. Local elites were often incorporated into the system, blending Roman governance with native traditions. Roads, laws, and coins helped tie the provinces together. Though far from the forum, each province was a piece of Rome, an echo of its order, carved into mountains, deserts, and coasts. Rome's founding date was used as a calendar system. To the Romans, time began not with the birth of Christ, but with the founding of their city. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus. From this date, they developed the system of ab herb condita, from the founding of the city. Historians and scribes used this timeline to record events, laws, and historical milestones. So, for example, the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE would be listed as the year 709 AUC, while other dating methods were also used, such as naming years after consuls or counting from major events. Ab herb condita remained a symbol of Rome's central place in history. The idea was simple but profound. The city was the axis around which time itself revolved. Even after the system fell out of widespread use, its legacy lingered, a calendar measured in pride, myth, and memory. Emperors issued edicts like modern laws. In the Roman Empire, the emperor's word carried the weight of law. Through edicta edicts, rescripta official replies, and mandata administrative instructions, emperors shaped everything from tax codes to religious practices. These proclamations were recorded, published, and enforced across the empire. Some addressed specific legal disputes. Others announced sweeping reforms. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices attempted to curb inflation by setting limits on goods and wages. Constantine's edicts of Milan declared religious tolerance for Christians. These writings, often compiled in law codes, influenced future systems for centuries. While the Senate and magistrates continued to exist, real legislative power shifted to the imperial office. Over time, The emperor's voice became the law itself, an echo carried by scribes, messengers, and magistrates, all the way to the farthest provinces. In their words, carved on stone or inked on scrolls, the shape of daily life was drawn and redrawn. Roman coins had emperors' faces for propaganda. Every Roman coin was a miniature billboard, spreading the face and message of power across the empire. Emperors used currency not just to facilitate trade, but to shape public perception. Their portraits, often idealized, appeared alongside inscriptions declaring titles, virtues, or victories. One might boast restorer of peace or father of the nation, while the reverse side showed military triumphs, divine approval, or symbols of Roman prosperity. These coins reached far-flung provinces carried by soldiers, traders, and citizens, each one silently affirming the emperor's presence and authority. Changes in the emperor's image reflected shifting fortunes: a younger face for a new reign, a laurel wreath after a military success, or even a coin minted to honor a dead ruler and ease succession. In a world without mass media, Roman coins were a steady voice, speaking of power, stability, and control in every marketplace and purse. The empire's borders were guarded by fortified walls. Rome's might was not only shown in conquest, but in its boundaries. Along the edges of the empire, from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germania, Rome built limes, fortified frontiers of stone walls, wooden palisades, watchtowers, and forts. The most famous is Hadrian's Wall in Britain, but others spanned the Danube and the Rhine, protecting against raids and regulating trade. These borders weren't completely sealed. People moved in and out, merchants crossed with goods, and diplomacy flowed with tension. Soldiers stationed along the limes kept constant watch, responding to threats and maintaining order in the borderlands. The walls symbolized more than defense. They marked the known world, separating Rome from the wild beyond. In time, some walls were breached, others abandoned. But for centuries, they stood as silent lines drawn in the earth, dividing empire from chaos, civilization from wilderness. Roman spectacles included animal hunts. In the grand amphitheaters of the Roman world, the games began long before the gladiators took the stage. Venations, wild animal hunts, were elaborate shows featuring exotic creatures captured from across the empire. Lions, leopards, elephants, crocodiles, bears, and more were shipped to Rome at great expense, then released into the arena to fight trained hunters or each other. Sometimes the shows mimicked mythological scenes or staged mock hunts with scenery and props. The animals themselves were both marvel and menace, symbols of imperial power over nature. Audiences came not just for violence, but for wonder. The sight of a giraffe or rhinoceros, unfamiliar and majestic, stirred awe in the crowd. But beneath the spectacle was cruelty. Thousands of animals died for entertainment, their deaths choreographed into a brutal ballet. The arena was not just a place of sport. It was a mirror of empire, powerful, theatrical, and often merciless. Romans prayed before major decisions, even battles. Though Rome was a practical and often ruthless empire, it placed deep faith in the will of the gods. Before battles, voyages, or important decisions, generals and officials performed rituals to seek divine approval. Augurs observed the flight of birds, the behavior of sacred chickens, or signs in the sky. Priests read omens from sacrificed animals, searching for favorable signs in the entrails. Public prayers were offered to Mars before war, to Jupiter for justice, to Vesta for protection. In the Forum, temples buzzed with votive offerings, small statues, coins, or carved messages of thanks. Even emperors made sacrifices before campaigns, consulting priests before each move. If omens were bad, plans could be delayed. The divine was not just above, it was woven into politics, law, and war. Every prayer was a negotiation, every ritual a plea. And in Rome, even the gods were part of statecraft. The empire once split into 4 rulers. In the late 3rd century, faced with crisis on every front, invasion, rebellion, and economic collapse, Emperor Diocletian introduced a bold solution: divide the empire. In 293 CE, he established the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 rulers. 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, governed the eastern and western halves. Each had a junior partner, a Caesar, who assisted and would eventually succeed them. The goal was stability, a rotating leadership that could manage the empire's vast borders and prevent civil war. For a time, it worked. Roads were repaired, threats were contained, and reforms took root. But ambition soon returned. Successors clashed, alliances frayed, and within a generation, the system unraveled. Still, the Tetrarchy marked a turning point. An empire no longer ruled from one city, but many. It was the beginning of East and West, and the first clear shadow of the divide that would shape Rome's final centuries. Roman names followed a 3-part system. For Roman citizens, names weren't just personal, they were social markers, full of history and meaning. The classic Roman male name had 3 parts: the praenomen given name, nomen clan or family name, and cognomen, a nickname or branch of the family. So Gaius Julius Caesar breaks down into Gaius his first name, Julius from the Julian family, and Caesar a family branch or personal distinction. Some had additional names to reflect achievements, ancestry, or adoption. Women's names were typically based on the family nomen, for example, Julia for a woman from the Julian clan, and sometimes followed by descriptors to distinguish siblings. Over time, names grew longer and more elaborate, especially among emperors and aristocrats. These naming traditions weren't just labels. They were living stories, clues to heritage, ambition, and the complex web of Roman identity. Every name was a thread in the empire's vast tapestry. Emperors often died violently. To wear the purple in Rome was to court danger. Of the more than 70 Roman emperors, over half died by assassination, suicide, or suspicious circumstances. Some were killed by their own guards, others by rivals, conspirators, or even family members. Caligula was murdered by his bodyguards. Commodus was strangled in his bath. Caracalla was stabbed on the roadside by a disgruntled soldier. The Imperial palace was as perilous as any battlefield. The Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the emperor, often became kingmakers and king-breakers. Even beloved rulers walked a thin line, surrounded by intrigue and ambition. A few, like Augustus or Antoninus Pius, died peacefully, but most did not. The empire's highest seat was never stable, no matter how grand the throne. In the silence behind closed doors, in whispers down marble corridors, the end often came, sudden, cold, and from within. Some Roman provinces lasted for over 400 years. Rome's grip may have wavered in places, but some provinces remained loyal, structured, and Roman for centuries. Hispania, modern-day Spain and Portugal, for example, became part of the empire in the 2nd century BCE and stayed under Roman rule until the early 5th century CE. Syria, Gaul, and North Africa also remained key parts of the empire for generations. In these regions, Roman roads, language, laws, and architecture became part of everyday life. Cities flourished, local elites joined the Senate, and Roman citizenship spread widely. Even after the Western Empire fell, echoes of Roman governance and culture lingered in churches, legal codes, and city plans. These provinces were not just territories, they were homes, evolving with Rome's identity across time. To live in one was to live in a world where Roman and local traditions intertwined, quietly enduring beyond the reach of emperors. Roman aqueducts traveled for miles without pumps. Supplying fresh water to a vast and growing city was no small task, but Roman engineers met it with elegance and skill. Aqueducts, some stretching over 60 miles, carried water from distant springs and mountains into towns, baths, fountains, and homes. Using gravity alone, water flowed through gently sloped channels lined with stone, concrete, or terracotta pipes. Arched bridges carried aqueducts across valleys, tunnels bored through hills, siphons dipped across uneven terrain. The Aqua Claudia, Aqua Appia, and Aqua Marcia are among the most famous, and parts of them still stand. These systems delivered millions of gallons daily, sustaining Rome's population, hygiene, and infrastructure. No pumps, no engines, just calculation, stone, and the quiet force of gravity. In the whisper of flowing water through ancient channels, we hear not just utility, but ingenuity. A civilization that listened to the land and made it flow. Julius Caesar reformed the Roman calendar. By the time Julius Caesar rose to power, the Roman calendar had fallen into disarray. It was based on the lunar cycle, with months drifting out of sync with the seasons. To fix this, Caesar consulted with Egyptian astronomers and introduced the Julian calendar in 46 BCE. It aligned the year with the sun, setting it at 365 days with an extra day every 4 years, the leap year. To correct previous errors, that year had to be extended to an astonishing 445 days. Caesar also reorganized the months, standardizing their lengths and placing January at the start of the year. His reform brought order to time, a rhythm that echoed across agriculture, festivals, and governance. Though later refined into the Gregorian calendar we use today, the bones of Caesar's system remain. Every leap year, every calendar grid, still traces its roots back to that bold correction of time itself. Some Roman laws protected the poor. Though Roman society was deeply hierarchical, not all laws favored the elite. Over time, a number of reforms were introduced to protect the rights and welfare of the poor. The Lex Frumentaria provided subsidized or free grain distributions to Rome's lower classes, ensuring food security for thousands. Laws also limited the interest that creditors could charge on loans and offered protections against unjust eviction or harsh treatment by landowners. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code, granted plebeians some legal standing and access to public courts. Later, tribunes, elected officials of the people, had the power to veto decisions that harmed the lower classes. Though far from equal, these laws reflected a tension within Roman politics, the need to preserve stability by offering dignity, however modest, to those at the bottom. In its own imperfect way, Roman law sought to bind rich and poor under the same system. The Forum was the heart of Roman public life. In the center of ancient Rome lay the Forum Romanum, a bustling open plaza framed by temples, basilicas, and monuments. Here, citizens gathered to shop, debate, vote, worship, and witness the rituals of civic life. Politicians gave speeches from the rostra, merchants called out their wares, and philosophers held impromptu lessons in the shade of colonnades. Triumphs marched through the Forum, carrying generals, spoils, and prisoners. Funeral processions honored the dead. Legal trials unfolded before public eyes. As the city grew, emperors added their own forums nearby, grander spaces lined with marble and filled with statues. Yet the original Forum remained the symbolic heart of the Republic and early empire. To walk its paving stones was to step into the living pulse of Roman identity. Even in ruin, the Forum still hums with memory, a quiet echo of a people who built their government under the open sky. Roman farmers were the backbone of the economy. Behind Rome's armies, senators, and marble cities stood its farmers, quiet stewards of the land who fed the empire and held its foundations. Most Romans lived in rural areas, tending small pots of wheat, barley, olives, grapes, and vegetables. Families rose with the sun, worked the fields with hand tools, and stored their harvests in clay jars and stone granaries. Larger estates, owned by elites, were worked by enslaved laborers or tenant farmers, producing vast surpluses for trade and tax. Farming wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Even the great generals of Rome, like Cincinnatus, were idealized as humble farmers called from the plough. The rhythms of Roman time, festivals, calendars, and religious rites were closely tied to the seasons of planting and reaping. In every crust of bread, in every sip of oil or wine, the work of the Roman farmer could be tasted. Rome had a god of boundaries. To the Romans, even the edges of things had sacred meaning. Terminus, the god of boundaries, was honored with small stone markers placed at property lines, roads, and territorial borders. These boundary stones, termini, were often inscribed and protected by ritual. Once placed, they were not to be moved. On February 23rd, Romans celebrated Terminalia, a festival in his honor, with offerings of grain, honey, and wine poured onto the ground. Neighbors gathered to reaffirm borders peacefully, sharing food and blessings. This reverence for boundaries reflected the Roman love of order and structure, not just in land, but in law and life. Boundaries defined ownership, identity, and trust. Even the vast frontiers of the empire echoed this spirit, with walls, roads, and river crossings marked and named. In every stone that said this far and no farther, the spirit of Terminus quietly stood guard. Some Roman holidays are still celebrated. Many Roman festivals, transformed by time and tradition, live on in modern calendars. Saturnalia, a winter festival marked by gift-giving, feasting, and social reversal, shares echoes with Christmas and New Year's celebrations. During Saturnalia, masters served slaves. Togas were replaced with colorful clothes, and the streets filled with music and laughter. Lupercalia, a February rite of purification and fertility, may have influenced Valentine's Day. Floralia, honoring the goddess Flora, welcomed spring with flowers and games, much like May Day. Even the Roman calendar itself, with its months, leap years, and names, still shapes how we mark time. These ancient festivals weren't just rituals, they were expressions of joy, renewal, and connection. Though the gods have changed and the meanings shifted, the rhythm of celebration continues. In candles lit, gifts exchanged, or flowers tossed in spring, the memory of Rome quietly blooms again. The Roman eagle was a sacred military symbol. Among the most revered symbols in the Roman army was the aquila, the eagle standard carried by each legion. Cast in silver or bronze, mounted on a staff, and guarded by an aquilifer, it represented the soul of the unit. To lose an eagle in battle was a terrible shame to recover. One was an act of glory. The eagle embodied Jupiter's divine authority, the strength of Rome, and the unity of the soldiers who marched beneath its wings. It was more than an emblem, it was a living presence on the battlefield, saluted before and after combat, and protected at all costs. Some eagles were displayed in temples or paraded through triumphs. Even centuries later, the image of the eagle returned, adopted by empires, nations, and armies who sought to borrow Rome's majesty. But the original aquila soared above them all, silent, watchful, eternal. Romans feared being buried alive. Among the many fears that haunted the Roman imagination, premature burial held a chilling place. With limited medical knowledge, it was sometimes difficult to distinguish between deep unconsciousness and death. Stories spread of people waking inside tombs, clawing at stone or wood. To guard against such tragedies, some tomb inscriptions included appeals for careful examination or instructions to delay burial for several days. Certain burial rites, like placing a mirror near the mouth or shouting the name of the deceased, may have served as informal checks. Wealthier Romans sometimes commissioned tombs with ventilation shafts or stone slabs that could be opened from within, just in case. These quiet fears remind us of the fragility of life in the ancient world, where death came without warning, and the line between sleep and silence was thinner than we like to think. The empire's fall was gradual, not sudden. The fall of Rome is often imagined as a single moment, a dramatic collapse into darkness. But in truth, the decline of the Western Roman Empire unfolded slowly, over centuries. Economic strain, military overstretch, internal corruption, shifting populations, and repeated invasions gradually weakened its foundations. Rome was sacked in 410 CE by the Visigoths, again in 455 by the Vandals, and finally in 476, the last Western emperor was deposed. Yet even then, much of Roman life continued. Cities remained, laws endured, and the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, thrived for nearly another 1,000 years. The fall was less a crash than a transformation. Brick by brick, Rome gave way to something new. And in the silence that followed, seeds of the modern world began to grow, rooted in Roman soil. Roman mythology was deeply interwoven with daily life. For the Romans, mythology wasn't just a set of stories, it was a living framework for understanding the world. Myths explained the origins of cities, the meaning of storms, the favor of the gods, and the behavior of stars. Every temple, festival, and family shrine was tied to a tale. Children grew up hearing the adventures of Aeneas, the wrath of Juno, the cleverness of Mercury, and the strength of Mars. Public ceremonies reenacted sacred legends. Emperors linked themselves to divine ancestors. Even simple objects, coins, mosaics, oil lamps, often bore mythological images. Myths were a part of architecture, agriculture, justice, and love. They made sense of fortune and failure, and gave beauty to the unknown. In Rome, the gods were never far. They stood in marble, moved in dreams, and whispered from the past, shaping daily life like stories carved into stone. The legacy of Rome still shapes the modern world. Though the empire fell long ago, its influence is woven into the fabric of our daily lives. In language, we hear it in every Latin root and Roman name. In law, we inherit its concepts of justice, contracts, and citizenship. In architecture, we see its arches and domes rise again in capitals and cathedrals. Roads, plumbing, urban planning, calendars, all trace echoes to Roman innovation. The idea of a republic, the weight of a senate, the dream of empire, these two are Roman shadows. Even the very script of this sentence descends from Roman letters. The empire may be gone, but Rome never fully disappeared. It lives in symbols and systems, in ruins and rituals, in memory and myth. And as we drift now into sleep, we carry with us a quiet truth. The world we know still walks in sandals, beneath a Roman sky. And so, our quiet walk through the Roman Empire comes to an end. We've wandered beneath aqueducts and arches, along ancient roads and whispering walls, past emperors in purple and farmers in fields, into courts, baths, temples, and theatres, through myth and memory, marble and dust. We've seen how Rome stretched its hands across the world, and how its touch still lingers. In the shape of your calendar, in the curve of your city streets, in the stories we still tell, and the words we still speak. But more than anything, we've glimpsed how deeply human the Romans were. They ate takeout on street corners. They scribbled jokes on walls. They made laws to help the poor, and mistakes they couldn't take back. They loved, feared, fought, laughed. And just like us, they wondered how they'd be remembered. Their empire may have faded, but in their footsteps we find reflections of ourselves, stubborn, striving, imperfect, enduring. Tonight, all those voices have softened into silence. The Coliseum is empty now. The last torch has burned low. Statues sleep in their gardens. The old gods have slipped into dreams. And here you are, at the edge of history, wrapped in time's quiet cloak, safe, still, drifting gently beneath a Roman sky. If you happen to still be awake, you can go ahead and watch the next chapter now. But if your eyes are already heavy, there's no need to move. The past is holding you. The night is carrying you. And Rome is very far away. Good night, sleepy traveler. And thank you for dreaming with us.